Has this ever happened to you? I took my rear wheel off to put it in the car or to fix a flat tire, and now my chain is all floppy. If so, you've come to the right place, because in this video, I'm going to show you how to perfectly tension your fixed gear / single speed chain for maximum smoothness. And you know what else has maximum smoothness? The segue to this message from our sponsor. I've ridden a lot of bikes in my time, and Wabi Cycles makes some of the smoothest bikes that I've ever tried. Stick around to the end of the video to learn about what makes them so dang buttery smooth, and check them out linked in the description. You're only going to need one tool for this job, and a couple of optional tools if you want to keep your space clean. The first tool is just a 15mm wrench to tighten your nuts. Yeah, it is nuts. It sounds weird, but it is nuts. Most single speed and fixed gear bikes will use a 15mm wrench to tighten the nuts. If you have a slightly different set of wheels, then it may use a 6mm Allen key, or if you're using a quick release, you don't need any tools. And also, why are you using a quick release on a fixed gear / single speed? On the rear, especially. But if that's you, you don't need any tools. My bike, like most single speeds and fixed gears, uses a 15mm wrench. And then there's some optional tools. I'm putting on some gloves because you gotta touch the chain, and it can get pretty messy. And I, like most people, don't have a fancy pants pro-level mechanic stand, so I like to put something down underneath the bike when I flip it over so that it doesn't get all scraped and scuffed up. I have this muck-off bike mat. You can find all the gear that I'm using in the description. Step 2, flip the bike over. Please don't fall, Gary. Please excuse the copious amounts of rust on my bike. Let's say you've taken your wheel out and you're trying to figure out how to put this thing back in. Putting the chain onto your bike is super easy. All you gotta do is grab your wheel, put it back in to the track handle or the dropout, grab your chain, and see that the chain loops from outside of this chainstay and then into the inside of the chainstay, and then just loop it over the cog, just like that. I'll show you again. Off, on. Oh, so easy, so easy. All right, that's step 2. So this is the track end, this is the hub of the wheel, and this is the axle. What you gotta do is just pull the wheel back in the track end as far as it'll go, or push the axle, whatever floats your boat, as far as it'll go. This is just the initial adjustment. So then it doesn't have to be perfectly straight, doesn't have to be perfectly tight, and then just tighten down the nuts. We will make final alignment adjustments and fine-tuning later. And as you can see, the chain is already pretty tight. I like my chain when grabbed in the middle to have about 1 inch of slack, meaning when you pull it up, there's about 1/2 inch and then down 1/2 inch. And as you can see, this chain needs to be a lot tighter if we're gonna have it not fall off. To do that, I like to tighten one side at a time. So I am pushing with my thumb, pushing the wheel this way so that the axle goes farther back in the dropout. And then I tighten it. And then I do the same thing, but in the other direction. Then now I'm going to pull the wheel this way with this hand. And pull it a little farther back. And now the chain is super, super tight, so we gotta adjust it again. You can tell which side you need to adjust by looking at how the tire is lined up in your chain stays. This tire is a little too far this way, so we need to loosen up the non-drive side, so that we can give it some more slack into the direction that it needs to go. So this tire is centered with the bottom bracket. Right now it's a little offset. You can see this side has more space than the non-drive side. Can't even fit my finger through there. This one, I can pretty comfortably fit my finger inside. That's what she said. So now I'm gonna loosen this up, give it a little more slack, which allows the wheel, this part of the wheel, to move this way, which in turn moves this axle back or forward the bike's direction forward, the bike's direction, and the drop out, which gives it some more slack. Tighten that, and now there's a little bit more slack in the chain, and just keep going back and forth between the sides until there's a sufficient amount of slack. Just a little thumb pressure on this side of the wheel gives a lot more slack, and that's about where I like it. Could even do a little tighter. So I'm taking this thumb, pushing the wheel this way so that it pulls this back in the dropout. Just a little bit of pressure is all you need. And it's an art. It takes some practice to really be able to fine tune and feel how much chain tension you have. And then do the same thing on the other side to tension it a little bit more while also centering the wheel in the dropout. So now I'm going to be pulling the wheel this way, which and then in turn pulls it back in the dropout. And that feels pretty good to me. It's a little on the tight end. Some people like it tighter, some people like it looser. I don't like the chain to be too tight, because if it is, then it binds onto the chain ring and on the cog, and it wears it down a lot faster, and it's also not as smooth and not as nice to ride. So just give it a spin around. Make sure not to cut any of your fingers off. Grab a safe place. I like to grab the seat tube. And yeah, although it's tight, it's not binding at all. So this is a good amount of tension, about half an inch up, half an inch down. It's where I like it, maybe even upwards to 3/4 of an inch up, 3/4 of an inch down, if you like it a little looser. Unless there's a final check where you spin the chain around, or the cranks around, to see if it has, to check if there's any spots that are too loose or too tight. Like this spot right here is much looser than this spot right here, but both of them are within tolerance. It's not binding, it's not too tight, and it's not too flappy and too loose. But this is because usually the chain ring is not perfectly round, so there will be tight spots and there'll be loose spots. The cheaper and more worn out chain ring that you have, the more you're going to have extremes between tight spots and loose spots, and it can be harder to get chain tension, and that can be an indicator that you need a better or less worn out chain ring. But this chain ring's pretty new. It's pretty round, so there's not a huge amount of tension difference throughout the pedal stroke, and I'm pretty happy with that. So just but if you do find a tight spot or a spot that's too loose, just do the previous step over again. Alignment check. See that the center of the tire is lined up with the center of the brake bridge, and that the gaps on both sides of the tire are even. And the other place to check is the gaps in the chainstay, how close the chain is to one side versus the other side. And it's actually looking like this side is a little too tight. There's a bigger gap on the left side than there is on the right side, so that means this side needs to have less tension. So just like before, to get the rim and the tire centered on the frame set, and to also reduce the chain tension at the same time, because I personally like it a little looser. Loosen up this side, and that check the gap. That's about even, and then retighten it. Just loosening up and retightening the bolts or the nuts is enough to decrease the tension a little bit. And now the gaps right there in the frame, where the rim is by the chain stays. Looks pretty even. I'm gonna do the final check for tension around the chain ring. This spot is tighter, but it's tolerable because chain rings aren't super round. This spot is really loose, but still tolerable. Or chain rings aren't perfectly round, and the more expensive chain ring you get, usually the rounder it's going to be. And the more even of a chain tension and the smoother of a pedal stroke, theoretically, you'll be able to get. But I'm pretty happy with that. There's another loose spot, but again, tolerable. Not binding the chain. You gotta make sure that it's wheel tight so that it doesn't slip when you're pulling a skid. Check the other side, both clockwise. Put my weight into that. There, I got another 1/8 of a turn, and that can make a difference. So just give it the final spin. Make sure it's nice and smooth. And that's how you get perfect chain tension on your fixed gear every single time. You will get better at it the more that you do it. I am very sweaty. I hope this video helped you. And like any sweaty person, summer in Taiwan is so freaking hot, dude. I'm gonna go ride my bike. Speaking of my bike, this video is sponsored by Wabi Cycles. Wabi's bikes are so good that I only own one bike, and it's a Wabi. Like, I don't need to have N+1 bikes if all I want to do is ride my favorite bike. Part of what makes Wabi so supple and comfortable and springy and lively to ride is that they construct their bikes meticulously by hand, where every millimeter and every fraction of a millimeter counts. And you know what else you get with that? You get consistent tire clearance. When they say 32C can fit, they mean 32C can fit. When they say 45C can fit on the Thunder, they mean it. There's no variance there. Their bikes are constructed out of lightweight, sturdy, and lively Reynolds 725 tubing or Columbus Spirit tubing, which is some of the lightest and thinnest steel tubing that money can buy. Be sure to check out Wabi Cycles, linked in the description, to get on the buttery fixed gear of your dreams. All right, I don't have my list of patrons, so it's just off the top of my head. If I miss anybody, I'm sorry. Fixie famous shoutouts to Brandon Black, Julian Corona, Brent David, Mario Perez, Tad Onchi for helping to make these fixed gear videos possible through your support on Patreon. And remember that life is short, but don't make it shorter. So be sure to ride your bike every day to be reasonably dangerous, but be sure to tension your chain correctly before you do.